And I'm thrilled to have with me today a very special guest to kick off this new season in a new year, 2022. We have the legend that is Randy Johnston. Good day, Randy.
Hey, Rob, good day to you and all of your listeners.
Randy, people listen to this podcast in 144 countries. They might not listen on the day that we're recording this, which is late 2021. We're in a wonderful position to review really what's happened in this amazing year and look ahead at what might be coming up. You know the accounting and fintech world very well. But regardless of when they listen and what they're doing while they're listening to it, you always have some gems of wisdom to share. So just for people that don't know you, Randy, can you give us a quick summary of your background over the last 30, 40, 50 years, however long you've been in this game, so people get a feel for where you're coming from?
Well, I appreciate that, Rob. It turns out that I've been around the profession for 45 plus years and actually around technology for 60 plus years. So I've written a good number of systems, advised on a variety of systems. Pretty much a rule of thumb that I apply is if you recognize a technology vendor's name, I have probably done some technical consulting for them at one point in time or another. So most of the major providers to the profession, CCH, Thomson Reuters, Iris, Sage, Microsoft, Dell, Apple, HP, IBM, Lenovo, all of those are clients. As it turns out, I've met some really wonderfully smart people and just tried to provide them a little bit of insight. But over the years, dealing with both accountants in public practice and those in industry, I've tried to figure out how to apply technology to the practice of accounting regardless.
Now, accounting itself hasn't changed over the years. When we go back to it, if you had a piece of paper and a quill pen and knew what a general ledger was and double entry bookkeeping, technology didn't figure into it at all. But now we cannot separate technology from the accounting world, can we?
No, not at all. In fact, you're absolutely right. Things have been so much the same, but now with the automations, whether it's in artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, or machine learning, there have been so many changes in those areas. Plus, we're starting to get to some pretty interesting things with predictive analytics and other things that I think will influence us over the next decade or more.
Now, we're going to talk about what's critical for the accounting profession in the next few years, but just to summarize where we've got to right now, how would you review 2021 for the profession?
Well, that's a wonderful question. That 2021 wasn't a stellar year, by the way.
Okay.
And I don't think that's a function of pandemic. I think that's a function of transition that I think may not always be favorable.
We got to the end of 2020 and people thought that COVID was ended and everything would get back to normal, but that's not the way it worked out, is it?
Not the way it worked out at all. And with the Omicron variant, even though it looks like it may be more mild, it's certainly more virulent in terms of spread. And, there's a lot of fear that's been triggered by that in both the economic markets and just in businesses in general. So one would hope that that would turn. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of businesses are running, instead of running normally, they're still running, trying to be contingent upon what might happen with Omicron and what might happen with it. There's so many what ifs that's a real problem.
You bring up an excellent point, because it used to be that we knew what best practice looked like, and we could make 2, 3, 5-year plans. But now with VUCA, this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, you know that word well, we can't with any firmness and assuredness make plans, can we?
I don't think you can. We've always had to be flexible. I always thought that people who were willing to change, who were willing to go where they had to go to accomplish their goals, really wound up being better. Now it's almost mandatory. It's not really optional. And people who are trying to do things the same way, they may not get the same results. That old phrase, if you do things like you've done them in the past, you're going to get this. No, I'm not even sure that's true now.
But we are talking about CPAs. They are not known for their adaptability and their flexibility, and nor should they be, really. As you say, it's been done the same way. So have they been forced to be more agile and adaptive, would you say?
Definitely have been. And I think that's been true all over the world. In many cases, regulations have changed. There have been so many support programs put in place, things that were brand new that all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, we have to accommodate that. But along the way, The technology pace has really accelerated. Some people have said that as much as 5 years of change happened in the past year or so. I think that's probably true. So we've had all sorts of new technologies thrown at us, and we just can't do things the way we've done them in the past.
Sure. So if I were to ask you to pick out what are perhaps two of the most critical areas for the profession over the next couple of years, what would stand out for you?
Well, one of them is certainly independence. That's been a concern for me for a number of years at this point. There's so much conflict of interest, and there's so much money in financial technology and accounting technology. Further, there's very few independent software creators at this point. So if you look upstream, almost everything has got quarterly numbers that they have to hit. So that's certainly one that's in place. Even to the point in the US market, the AICPA now has an independence ruling that they're advancing. And that's really, to me, hard to believe that you'd even have to claim that. But many accountants, frankly, don't maintain their independence. Number two, I would suggest to you, might be expertise. Now here, we know that accountants have always had great expertise in the practice of accounting, but they've also had to learn more about technology, learn more about managing people, learn more about so many different things now that I don't think that the singular focus on accounting actually serves very well. And that's particularly true if we expand our vision of public practice accounting into advisory, because I really do believe that the advisory movement is finally catching on a little more around the world. It's still slower than I'd like, but it's catching on.
It's excellent that you say that. We did a bonus show last week to talk about the challenges facing the profession over the next few years. And we looked at some of the sources, the blogs, the media outlets, the magazines, the Accounting Today's, Accounting Waves, people like that, and see what they had to say about what was coming up. And the need to upskill featured on quite a few lists of key challenges. Yes, the technical skills, but beyond that, the technological skills and the soft skills. Call it leadership, call it communication in a virtual world, call it advisory, call it negotiation and pricing. All of those are up there, and they include what you mean, don't they?
They really do. And, one thing I didn't disclose to the listeners, but I think about me, is I've been an instructor, college instructor, and wrote college textbooks in the past. So I have a real penchant for education versus training. One thing that I'm concerned for our accountants at all levels is they're being reactive in their learning, and they're doing just-in-time training, and they don't have the longer arc of what I think comes from education. So if you're really doing education right, you wind up focusing and getting more experience across a broader area, and you're thoughtful about your new education. See, this is well beyond PD or CPE hours, complying with getting 40 hours a year or whatever it is in the regulatory district. It's about, what am I learning that I can apply in my practice and to my clients? What am I learning that I can apply in the business that I'm helping manage? And what can I bring that's innovative? It takes a lot to stay current on that. We used to call that continuous learning, or a lifetime learner was the old ways of talking about that. And you've really got to have the passion to keep learning new things.
Martin Bissett will love that. One of the drums that he bangs is financial literacy and the education. And myself, as a former high school maths teacher, one of the reasons I got out of teaching was that I found myself training children to pass tests rather than actually educating them on a more holistic view of how to deal with life beyond school. So you would resonate with that.
I resonate with that 100%, because, I really try to be a holistic thinker and try to get people to go well beyond just reactionary learning. And frankly, test taking just drives me crazy. So, that part of your comment, I'm actually in line with too. Yeah. The fact of the matter is, we're trying to take care of ourselves, our families, the people around us. And if we've got that type of vision, we are so much better serving ourselves and others.
Yes. Now, as we've seen these times challenge the accounting profession and the businesses that they serve, Some accounting firms have not fared too well. Some have fallen by the wayside even. Some have excelled, we know that. So what in your view, Randy, separates the good accounting firms and even the good accountants from the great ones?
Yeah, well, hands down, that is the client focus. Always passionately trying to take care of clients no matter what. Now, it turns out there's going to be compliance around for a long time to come. I look at compliance as being somewhat backward looking, if you want to think of it that way,
Yeah.
Rob.
Historical.
And yeah, historical. And I really think about advisory as being forward looking. And so this whole advisory culture piece, when done right, is a big deal. Unfortunately, a number of vendors are trying to hijack advisory and take it over for their own sales purposes, and I suppose that's all right, but I don't think so. And this is really about trying to be proactive with your clients, trying to keep their best interest in mind as opposed to reactive, answering a question that's been thrown at us. So much of the time, I've learned the phrase whole of client approach. I think that really is a good way to think about it, and that advisory planning for both business and personal makes a great deal of difference. In fact, I learned about a new personal planning system this week that is really a winner, I think. Now, we'll see how that all comes out. But all of those types of things are a big deal. So, this idea of keeping a high and wide view versus a narrow and deep consulting view is a big deal. Mm-hmm. So, the simple short answer, client focus.
Well, I'd love to follow up on that a little bit with you. And I've got a feeling we're going to have a part 2 interview here and bring you on for another episode to finish this off, because it's such a privilege to deep dive with you on these things. Let's just track back a little bit there. When you say client focus separates the good accountants from the great ones, hasn't or shouldn't that always have been a priority for accountants?
Always 100% should have been. And the best firms have always been like that. And it's fascinating because I do get the privilege of consulting inside a large variety of firms, from small to large, in the US market and in the Canadian markets. I've been in firms from sole practitioner to a significant number of the top 100 firms here. And when you walk in and you can see and hear and smell and feel the client focus in a firm, it's a beautiful thing, because everybody's going down that same path, as opposed to firms that are trying to manage book of business, trying to make the most money for me as the partner. And, it's a quite different culture. Client experience, by the way, in 2021 was one of the biggest things that I think I learned and tried to drive on. And my second favorite word in 2021 was collaboration. I haven't figured out the right words for 2022, but I know that client experience, team member experience, and dropping bottom line dollars to the partners will continue to be, key linchpins to strategy, because they've been that way for me for a decade or more. So I see no reason they wouldn't be the same in the coming decade.
And when you talk about client focus, we have 18,000 or more listeners to this show that have tuned in over the years, and they will be listening to you, these accounting professionals, and saying, well, client focus, that seems so obvious. But firms and individuals don't always get that right. And what is the reason that they don't? Is it complacency? Is it ignorance? Is it arrogance?
Those are good diagnostics, but I do believe that a lot of it is they wind up getting too busy, and they get too firm focused or interior focused rather than external focus. I think you've got to be outward facing on this stuff. In fact, I would go further to say, we'll take a simple golden rule statement. If you apply the golden rule to your clients, you'll come out very well on this. But the fact of the matter is, we often are not applying the golden rule. So therefore, we're focusing on the wrong person in the transaction.
And for clarity, golden rule is treat others as you would have them treat you. And we've even had the advancement of the platinum rule, which is treat others as they would want to be treated, not how you would want to be treated. So it goes beyond that, doesn't it?
It goes well beyond that. And in fact, I've found that, the phrase what goes around comes around really applies here too, Rob. And the fact of the matter is that I always want to have my clients feel that they got more than they had bargained for, the more than they expected. And, likewise, that seems to always come back around for me too. I benefit whenever my clients are, in a good position.
When firms get client focus, client experience wrong, is that down to the culture and the leadership, would you say, or is it down to individuals? Because we know good accountants in poor firms that get CX really well, don't they?
They do, but I do believe it is from the top. It is from the partners and the managers, and driven all the way down, because what happens is you inherit bad culture, or you can, and it is really a fight. And it's actually part of the reason I think we've had the great resignations, and I think it's part of the reason we've had the great retirements. People have just said, I'm not going to work in this environment. I'm not going to treat people this way, where I'm going to go someplace where I can treat them better. And I think it is not only a people treatment thing, but it's also even in some cases applications. So I'll use the simple old word of portal. Having a great place for you to interact together, and the technology making it seamless, is a big deal. And let's face it, most of us can't work 24/7, don't want to. But if we can have a portal experience where our clients can go back and forth with us, and they feel like their needs are being handled, and we're responsive when we come back to work with them, that's kind of a part of it. But this whole idea of being quick to respond, and I don't want to make fast sound like it's paramount, but the culture that's historically been in the accounting profession: if you call me, I will call you by the end of the day. If you email, I will email you in 24 hours. Those types of very simple measures can come into play. But also, just taking the time to actually call people and speak to them. So much of the time we're hiding behind email rather than having a conversation with people, and so much more can be accomplished. And I realized calls take time, but this is a relationship business. It's not a transactional business. And that's another key area that I'd call critical if you look at the next few years.
And you're talking about the difference between being proactive and being reactive, aren't you?
Yes, very much so. And in fact, trying to anticipate what clients might need. If there's a regulatory change, a tax law change, whatever, reaching out. Now, that's been done for marketing purposes for a long time. Hey, sending everybody an email that has this, or put it in our newsletter, and that type of thing. But it really being thoughtful and granular about things that can make a difference, and reaching out. And it could be simply a transaction in the section of business that you're in. I'm going to pick on construction. So, maybe there's a new building materials that you read about, and you just forward that type of an article on to your client. Say, hey, I saw this piece about building materials. Don't know if it affects your practice, but I want you to be aware. So notice, all of a sudden, we're well outside accounting. We're just doing broad reading. And, one of the things that I believe accountants generally are is they're very smart people, but sometimes they're not reading in enough different places. So, Rob, you'll appreciate, I think my favorite book of 2021 was a book about DNA by Neil Shubin. And boy, did I learn a lot about DNA. Well, what's DNA got to do with the practice of accounting? But there's been so many times that's come up in conversation, simply because it's kind of mind opening in terms of opportunities.
I love that. And you're talking about a criticism that is leveled at some accountants when they are asked to have more of an advisory culture, which is this lack of commercial awareness, lack of business acumen, as you would call it, being more well-read, thinking more like a business owner and entrepreneur so they can serve their clients fully. That's what you're talking about.
Yes, it is. And it turns out that this idea that you wind up with knowledge in multiple categories, to me, is actually very important, because if I think about advisories being high and wide, one of the things that I'll tell you I have enjoyed is working in different industries through the years, because most people say you should focus on a single industry. And I found that way too boring, way too boring. And in fact, what I like to do is learn how things are done in manufacturing, distribution, healthcare, construction, not-for-profit, and take those ideas to the other industries. It's like, did you think about doing it like this? And it's like, well, no, we'd never thought about, well, it's being done here and here. Why wouldn't we do this?
And when I talk to accountants about where their opportunities lie, they want more business from those clients of other accounting practices that perhaps haven't served those clients as well as they should do. And from the keynotes I've given at virtual conferences, there are two reasons why accountants fall short with their current clients that leaves those clients vulnerable to approaches by their rivals. And that is, first, a lack of expertise, because COVID has brought about much more complex circumstances, and accountants need that ability to make hard commercial decisions in very emotional situations. So there's that level of expertise and skills that you talked about. But the other is the lack of proactivity. And clients have said, my accountants claim to be proactive by saying, if you need us, give us a call and we're here to help. And whatever you need, we're available. But that's not actually being proactive. That's not picking up the phone with a preemptive strike and offering some value, is it?
No, not whatsoever. And you are correct that the emotional charge over the last few years has been strong. And it's hard to keep your head clear as a business owner or as a client. And that's part of what good accountants can bring to the situation. Now, at the risk of sounding a bit on the personal side, unfortunately, I've been around a significant number of the disaster events here in the United States.
Okay.
And, my family razzes me because they know that I tend to pass out at the sight of blood. But it turns out I've been in situations where, you just kind of tough it out and you just keep a clear head. And in ugly, ugly situations, I've had the good fortune of keeping a clear head. And then afterwards, it's like, how did I do that? I don't know. But, more on your point, the business owners in many cases are on the verge of losing their businesses.
Yes.
They've had a health event in their family or a fraud, theft. I mean, you can take all sorts of emotional triggers here. And part of our goal as good accounting advisors is to help the client see the best path forward, which may not be a very comfortable path, but at least it's clearly going to be a good one. And by the way, our opinion and expertise and advice hopefully will be, good for the client. But in some cases, the clients they're not going to want to do it. As I think I have a granddaughter in New York say, that not be the plan. And when that not be the plan, you better do her plan is kind of my rule of thumb.
Yeah, as my 17-year-old daughter would say, true that, she would say, true that. So you're spot on. Randy, I'm going to ask you one more question as we wrap things up here, and we'll get you back on another episode to talk a little bit more about the technology and what's coming up there. But just in a couple of points, really, what are the biggest challenges accounting professionals of firms will be facing as we come up to a new year, a new start, a fresh season, particularly if they want to grow and thrive?
Yes. Here, Rob, it's real clear to me. There are things that matter and things that you can control.
Right.
And if you think about a Venn diagram, those two circles and where they overlap.
As a former math teacher, I know Venn diagrams very well.
I knew you'd know Venn diagrams. That's why I picked that, but I hope our listeners do too. You just think about those overlapping circles, that point in the middle, the things that matter and the things that you can control. That's what you should focus on. And so to me, focus is the key word in that. And, a lot of times you're worried about things you can't control, or you're worried about things that don't matter. That's a waste of time. But if you focus on those things, that will help. And I believe along the way, one of the focus areas would be that you can provide better client service with focus. And what happens is you learn more about industries when you're narrow. That's why through the years, the niche focus, if you will, the verticalization has been so prominent, because you can learn a lot about healthcare And in this, for example, and in my case, if you said, hey, what's an ICD code? What's a CPT code? Those are basically diagnosis and procedural codes. How do those work? Then how do you bill? And so you have this in-depth discussion about very critical things. We could have a similar thing about costing, and those all sound like they're getting out, but you're getting very focused on the things that matter, because if you can control those things, you can help the clients to a large degree.
Yes. And you're talking about priorities here. When you say, let's focus, the question then becomes, well, what are the things that matter? And what matters are the priorities. And in your view, Randy, the 2 or 3 key priorities for an accountant or CPA should be?
Well, yes, the priorities, and I'm going to back it up just a little bit, Rob, because the priorities are really what matters for the client. So notice I turn it immediately over to that.
Yes.
And if you always keep the client focus first, then that should help you. Now, if I turned it inward for just a minute and answered the question that you asked, I think the priorities do have to be how you take care of your team. I think it's how you grow personally. Those are both pretty critical. And then how, in fact, you weave all of those experiences together. So, in effect, what you're doing is you're creating a great client experience by focusing on the client, focusing on the team. And what will happen is, I believe, naturally out of that will flow the profitability that you might desire and so forth. So that's kind of the structure. Sounds a little backwards. I think about other methodologies that I've learned through the years, but that seems to always have worked well for me. And it also seems to work well in what I consider the highest quality CPA firms that I've been in North America.
Yeah, Randy, this is so good. I'm going to ask you in a minute to leave us with some words of encouragement and even sagely advice for the leaders listening, people that lead accounting firms, that are owners, that manage teams. So be thinking about that. But while you ponder that, if people want to have a conversation with you, and you are always open to a conversation, you're such a giving person, what's a good way for them to reach out to you and start that?
Well, probably the most responsive way is email.
Yeah.
And my email is just as simple as it sounds. My name is Randy and my last name is Johnston, Randy J. And this is the harder part, at NMGI, as in Network Management Group Inc.com. And turns out I'm also Randy at K2E.com. So I have multiple emails. But if you hit me an email, my rule of thumb is I will always be back with you in 24 hours. And I usually will offer my calendar, and I don't mind having a conversation. And I would go further, even though you've got thousands of listeners here, Rob. I suspect I can have a conversation with many of them. And my commitment is to do that. And I'm not looking for billable time. I'm looking to help you choose one of the right ways. See, my rule of thumb in technology and accounting is there's dozens of right ways to do things, hundreds of wrong ways. All I'm trying to do is put you on one of the dozens of right ways that fits your plan. And I'd be happy on that.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about you, Randy, is you're an inveterate learner. In these conversations, as well as giving, you're always asking questions and looking for that extra little bit of knowledge that you don't know.
Mm-hmm. And, I got to tell you, I learn something new every day, and it continues to be exactly like that. And, I only wish that I could, live another 100 years so I could learn even more.
Well, Randy, this has been an honor today. Just some parting words from you to the leaders who are listening. They've got influential responsibilities. They've got a voice in their firms. What would you say to them as we emerge into a new dawn?
Yes. So I would say first, you need to know yourself. If you think about the advisory approach that I like to use, it's about planning. And you've got to plan for your business, and you've got to plan for yourself. So you got to take the time to know what's important to you. And that's the first place to start. Then the next place to start is turn it to the other end. What do you expect your clients to ask of you? And then third, what do you expect your team members to ask of you? Now, if you've got those things clearly in mind, then you can make a plan on how to transition from where you are today to where you need to be. In some cases, you may have a long journey. In other other cases, you may have a very short transition to take place. But you've got to keep your priorities straight, and you can't let others set your priorities. You've really got to be the person in control of that. Remember, things that matter and things that you can control, you got to worry about first the things that matter to you, and then you've got to act on those things that you can control. That should be your focus of 2021 and beyond.
Well, Randy Johnston, all the way over there in Kansas, that's been a real privilege. Thanks so much for your inspiration and your insights today.
Thanks for the invitation, and good day to you and all your listeners around the world.
You've been watching or listening to the Accounting Influencers podcast featuring hosts Rob Brown and Martin Bissett, with key interviews, what's working in the accounting profession, and news from the accounting and fintech world that helps you do your jobs better. We go out to 144 countries, over 20,000 unique listeners with 100,000 downloads, and it is accredited for continued professional education and development. Thank you for tuning in.